Good evening. A $200,000 public appeal has been launched tonight to give Glenfalloch, Dunedin's woodland garden and tourist centre, a major facelift. The funds raised are to cover the first stage of alterations designed to take the 100-year-old property into the 21st century. Michael Lidge reports.
For at least 20 years, Dunedin interest groups have been trying to find ways to make Glenfalloch work. The original 30 acres and substantial homestead were laid out in the days of gardeners and servants. Times have changed, and the Otago Peninsula Trust has been worrying for years how to make the property viable. Today's solution's a bold one, cutting admission from the present $2.50 a head, which was often never paid, to $1 a car using a coin-operated barrier arm, and simply making the place more attractive. The sprawling car park will make way for lawns, barbecues and shrubbery. The present cabin building will go, replaced by better car parking and an information centre, incorporating a shop and facilities for other peninsula groups. The existing chalet will be doubled in size and a full-time caterer appointed. It's hoped to get the building back to the days when it was a focal point for weddings and balls. And even more important, the City Council will take over supervision of the hard-to-maintain gardens and help restore the extensive paths and stone walls. Restoring the old homestead will be stage 2, but stage 1 alone will bring considerable changes.
So do you think once and for all, with this plan, we've solved some of the problems that have been associated with Glenfalloch?
I think so, yes. The Trust feels they have.
Best of luck.
There is one change, though, that mightn't be universally popular. The free-ranging peacocks are to go into a walk-in enclosure. Their hygiene and flower-destroying practices are a trifle suspect. Just what'll happen to the freer-ranging pigeons, no one's saying.
South Island Power for South Island consumers. That's the essence of a submission to the government's Electricity Task Force by the Otago Chamber of Commerce. Prepared by retired Otago University professor Tom Cowan, it says Clutha River dams could provide cheap power to Otago and Canterbury if they were locally owned. Alan Brady reports.
Professor Cowan's scheme is both audacious and simple. It proposes that all the power distribution authorities in Otago and Canterbury amalgamate to form one authority. Southern Electric, as it would be called, would then buy the Clyde and Roxburgh dams, which between them are capable of supplying all the electricity needs of the Otago-Canterbury region.
If we can generate our own electricity, sell it to people at the price that it costs to generate it, plus transmission costs, plus obviously running costs, then we are convinced that it will mean cheaper electricity.
Cheaper power is something which South Island interests have long argued should be available in the region where low-cost hydroelectricity is generated. So it came as no surprise today when organisations such as the Otago Southland Manufacturers Association threw their weight behind the Chamber of Commerce proposal. The majority of power supply authorities in the Otago-Canterbury region also thought the scheme was a good one. But one or two gave it only guarded support, and an Otago Central Power Board spokesman described it as irrational. Irrational or realistic, the scheme can't get off the ground unless Electricorp is prepared to sell its Clyde and Roxburgh dams. And then there's the question of cost. Professor Cowan estimates Southern Electric will need $1.5 billion to buy the Clutha River power stations.
Obviously, the monetary side of it has to be studied in great depth. We have put the figures that we have at the moment past some financial people who've said, yes, the scheme has merit.
The Chamber of Commerce proposal has been submitted to the Electricity Task Force, which is at present advising the government on options for the future of power generation and distribution in New Zealand.
The Otago University Community Sports Trust gains national financial support at a function in Dunedin tonight. After 5 years of operation, the Trust will outline its future direction with the backing of the Hillary Commission. Executive Director Glenn Turner says it'll now be able to expand its operations with special emphasis on administrative support for the so-called minor sports. One of Dunedin's stately homes, Dominican Hall in Park Street, came under the auctioneer's hammer this afternoon. Originally known as Transit House, the Victorian bluestone building was designed by architect John Burnside and for the past 8 years has been a family home. The auction attracted about 60 people, but the house was passed in at $295,000. Negotiations with the highest bidder are continuing. This week's visit by Concord to Christchurch has turned into a bonanza for Queenstown shopkeepers and tourist operators. Before they flew out today, the 94 Concord travellers spent thousands on seeing the sights and collecting souvenirs. Alana James joined them in Queenstown.
This is the most incredible trip that I think anybody could ever take, because not only is it fantastic in the stops that we're making, but the people who are on this trip are all brilliant. Most of them are self-made millionaires, so it's really a very, very exciting trip.
It's really a trip for the rich, though.
I think you need a couple of bucks to make this trip. I really do.
About 70,000 bucks to be exact, or $1 American for every mile travelled. That's the price to make aviation history. But with only 2 to 3 days to tour each country, it may seem an expensive way to see very little.
But look how many countries we're seeing. To go 24 approximate days and set 12 records for flying, where else could you spend 3 days, 2 days in every country from Acapulco to Kenya to South Africa to Australia, New Zealand, Sri Lanka? There's no way it could be done in 24 days.
Choppers were booked solid by the Concord passengers in Queenstown. They paid $1,000 a head for a trip over the mountains.
That flight today down to Milford Sound, the view of the mountains and all from the air was extraordinary.
The American spending power was overwhelming. They came, they saw, and they conquered the sights of half the South Island in just 2 days. But Christchurch complained the big spenders never got a chance to enjoy its charms.
We did see Christchurch. They're wrong. We saw the deputy mayor. The mayor wasn't there. He was in Japan, I understand. But we went all through Christchurch, and we flew out of it to here. This, I believe, is more of a, not interesting, but the scenery is the most magnificent I've ever seen in the world, including Switzerland. I mean, people compare it to Switzerland. I wouldn't want to compare it to Switzerland. I've been to Switzerland, and I think this is more beautiful.
The Concord travellers may seem unassuming, but amongst them is the founder of Apple Computers, a retired Supreme Court judge, multi-million-dollar lottery winners and media stars.
Some people came like I did because they couldn't resist going supersonic all the way around the world. It's the next nearest thing to being on the space shuttle, which I may not make.
What does it feel like on board?
Marvelous, absolutely marvelous. I'm going back to New York. I'm going to sell my house, my car, my children, and I'm going to travel Concord. It's that wonderful.
It's all right for some, isn't it? We'll be back tomorrow night. Good night.